I clicked the button. There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week, joining us is Christine Love, Toronto indie game legend, creator behind recently released Get in the Car Loser, previously released Ladykiller in a Bind, all the way back to Analog, a Hate Story, and Hate Plus. It has been a storied career in indie games, and I welcome you to the show.
Hi.
Yeah. For those of you who are not familiar with the game, Get in the Car Loser is a... Hold on, let me see if I can do this. It is a lesbian road trip JRPG visual novel. I'll call it a mashup. That's such a bad term. Mashup. Where you have what I love about this game is the combat system, and we're gonna get deep into that. But can you give us the brief on what is Get in the Car Loser?
Sure. So, like you said, it's a lesbian road trip RPG about following four queer losers who, armed with a sword that's been stolen from their school, are going on a road trip to fight evil. And we've got sort of this we got the battle system where it's like sort of very inspired by both classic JRPGs, but also like a lot of like slightly more modern stuff where it's like very momentum driven. It's a little bit streamlined. There's no like worldview. There's just like you're just sitting in the backseat picking which fights to get into. In the backseat, we've also got sort of this visual novel style dialogue presentation where you get to pick which dialogue options to shove your foot into your mouth optimally while picking which fights to get into.
Right. And there's something about the aesthetic in the game that I've had a hard time kind of putting into words, but it's like it's got this like biblical, I mean like classic biblical theming, but it's all pastel-y pink and cyans. Can you talk a bit about what the visual aesthetic of the game is? Because it's hard for me to describe. Like it's wild and cool, but I don't see a lot of things like it.
Yeah. So I was not like in the past on my other games I've taken like I'm sort of a lead on like what is like the visual style of the game, like what's like our mood board, but for this I just left it completely in the hands of the concept artist Isaac Saffron Robin, who is a comic artist who I met at TCAF, and I just like mentioned like I want to like collaborate, like just like on Twitter, and like they foisted their zines on me and they're like, I'd like to collaborate. And like I was so blown away by their use of color that I was like, yes, absolutely, I would love to do it sometime. So we've got like just tons of like really bright, super saturated colors. That was just me like pulling from their art. We got like this sort of like this hot pink car. The whole UI is like pulling from that pink. Just in general, it's very vibrant, and I think that matches, the sort of mood of the game, which is like I think ultimately like color use in games is like people don't talk enough about like just like the palettes you choose, like really like leans into like the energy level of the game. So like this is like super bold road trip on adventure. Everyone's like shouting heroic, so it's got to be poppy and bold.
Right. So
So
I 100% agree. It's one of the, I mean, it's a visual medium. Like it obviously makes sense that color is one of the like base brain triggers for like what makes us feel certain things. But I mean the narrative, like a lot of the angelic imagery comes from the narrative and the world building and these. Was that from the collab, or was that something premeditated that like was fed?
So, I mean, like, yeah, definitely. But also part of it is just like, this is like a big story about like fighting evil. And I wanted to, like, we have all these angels present, but they're not like necessarily useful forces for good. They're just sort of
Mm-hmm.
like the status quo. So, like, I wanted to like pull in like what's like the big like mythic imagery used to, like, because like it's a fantasy story, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to we've got like this sort of very uh 20th century Americana inspired vibes for this road trip because that just feels right for a road trip. But
Right.
because of that, like the fantasy elements are sort of pulling in this just a little bit of like mythicness like dropped into like otherwise like a very realistic sort of realistic feeling setting. So, we've got the angels and we sort of get into like the lore. It like it's all its own like lore.
Right.
It's
Right.
not like super like Christian or anything.
No. No.
It's all about like the Machine
The
Devil
Machine
is
Devils. Yeah.
he's, he's a very specific guy who sucks for very specific reasons, and like really just what I wanted to get into that was like this ancient evil that's been sealed away for 1,000 years and now is back because you know I think everyone can relate to being terrified of evils that were supposed to be gone for some reason reappearing.
Right.
And, like this metaphorical, sort of mythic, fantastic space ended up being good for just like exploring like something that's just like just disconnected enough from reality that like it makes for a good like, RPG.
Right.
Like and like a game where like ultimately you are solving your problems through violence and like everyone can just be like sort of like very heroic
Right. Right. Right.
while also still like feeling like, oh, I know where this is coming from.
The parable between like the ineffectiveness of the angelic entities and the potency of the machine devil is like a very interesting, I guess, take on the natures of cosmic good and evil. But I love the visual imagery. It's something that it doesn't feel super foreign to JRPGs. Like I've seen not identical but similar sort of things in like Final Fantasies pull big angelic creatures and
Oh yeah.
twisted metal demons quite frequently. But the other big thing that is kind of Final Fantasy in this, or specifically Final Fantasy 13, is that combat system, which I've heard you reference that FF13 was an influence for it a little bit, but I'm really quite fascinated about the reductionist nature of how this works. So can you talk to me a little bit about like how did you start down this path of wanting to make a hyper streamlined combat system for the game?
I mean, if there's anything about the game that's streamlined, it's like the reason why is because I've never made an RPG before, and I was like, I can't bite off too much. Like, there's only so many things I can learn at once. So, like, I didn't want to figure out like what's like the big like world map structure, for example. That was just like, that's too much. That's too much. That's too big a question. What are like stat curves? That's like that I need to simplify that because like otherwise it's juggling way too many numbers when like I've never like made a game that's needed to get quite that granular. So um anything that like would like otherwise be like an RPG mainstay that like is shaved off of this is like was just so that I could focus on like learning like how do I make like the combat feel good? Like how do I make like that moment to moment? How do you have like strategy in battles? And it meant that like I had to focus on like what are a few elements that I can really focus on making feel satisfying, and also like what are your goals in battle, how do I like tie in these abilities to your goals, and everything else from that is like, well, I don't want to like really get into like leveling or like like making a lot of like really complex like decisive choices about like what builds you're doing. So that led to this battle system where it's all builds based around your items. You can like swap stuff out before fights. You can like experiment with like what is your configuration, and instead of like having like leveling up, you just get your it all just comes down to your items, and
Right,
like
right.
those have the levels instead.
So it's fascinating that you say you approach this for a simplicity's sake, but to me it seems so much more complex to make a game that relies on flow more than stats. Like, I mean, when you look at the typical JRPG model, or if I was going to go and try and make something, I would look at tabletop games that have, like, you know, these systems, and sort of copy and mix some of those elements, and sort of end up with something that's pretty boring probably, but like relatively easy to produce. Did you end up finding this process easier than your expectation, or did the simplicity of the design actually, was the reality like that, or was it harder than you thought, or what?
I mean, it was definitely harder than I thought. Like there's no question about that. I don't know. I think there's definitely there's a failure mode that like some RPGs can get into. A lot don't fall into this, and a lot of like, you know, like come up with like really interesting mechanics. But like, especially if you look at like really early stuff, you'll find that like the moment to moment in battle is like just kind of boring. You're just like, you know, hitting the fight button over and over again, because like the actual decisions you're making are like the ones that take place out of battle. Like the decision making is like, how many fights are you going to do? Are you going to grind? Are you going to like get like the right items? But like when it comes to the actual moment to moment, there's just like, you just do one thing.
Right.
And like, I figured like that might be easier, but like it wouldn't be fun. So like, what would even be the point of making a game like that?
Right.
So, the one of the big things we took from Final Fantasy 13, like there's tons of Final Fantasy 13 influence in this battle system. I can talk about so much, but the big thing was the stagger meter, which is you have certain abilities that can build up this meter. They don't do a lot of damage, but what they do is once you hit an enemy and stagger, they get a damage multiplier, and then like suddenly all your exploit attacks do like much bigger damage. So instead of being like really steady damage over the fight, it turns into like a really lumpy thing of like, all right, I gotta get this guy staggered, then I'll do huge damage, then it'll end stagger, and I'll be like, have to get it back in, or maybe I need to heal up first because like I was too busy focusing on damage. The fact that it's like so lumpy just means that like it's not like battles aren't homogenous. It means you have like micro goals in battles. You're thinking about like my only, in a simple thing where you're just like always mashing fight, like the only thing you care about is like, can I kill it before it kills me? That's not necessarily like, you're not making a lot of decisions. Whereas in this, just the addition of stagger means that like, for one thing, that's immediately one choice. Are you going to be like focusing on like building up the ravage bar, or to push into stagger, and then once that happens, you can switch strategies. So like just like, that's a simplified version. There's obviously like a bunch of ways that like stuff can interact from there, but like even just like having like that one thing there to, you know, change things up, like here's a moment where you're doing this strategy and here's a moment where you're doing the other strategy.
Right. It's
makes battles less homogenous.
The one thing I likened it to, like, from I don't play a lot of JRPGs because I find them boring. Like that I click attack, click magic, click fire, click fire 2. Okay, there's my spell. Go next turn. I don't particularly find that all that engaging, but this it flows more like an MMO, where you have your hotkey buttons, and I'm like just timing the cooldown timers, and it's got that like almost an action vibe to it, which is very refreshing and honestly not what I was expecting walking into the game, and I really enjoyed. The funny thing is, simultaneously I've been playing Ogre Tactics, which is like the complete opposite end of the spectrum in terms of like hyper complexity. Like you have to move everybody around the board, and I've found these two games engage my mind in a way that like Final Fantasy VII, you know, had good narrative, but that combat was always a drag for me. Actually, most games like those kind of slow for me, and I've noticed that in myself, and I'm curious if that's something that you see more commonly in the players that have been picking up the game, or is that something that you identify with in terms of like play interest?
I mean, I definitely feel like, like the RPG, like especially like JRPGs have, they a lot of the really iconic ones are sort of like from an era where they still like didn't really know like what like quite like what mechanics would be interesting, or like they're just like sort of like adding stuff on over time. Like it took Final Fantasy like so many years to get like active time battle, and like
Hmm.
suddenly that changes everything. But like once you played one game with active time battle, like it's not enough. Like it's not like you need to build more on that. And I think a lot of like when like we think of like, JRPGs, you're often thinking about like older Final Fantasies or like Dragon Quest, or a lot of stuff that is like was still just like adding things and like didn't quite pull out, like was still coasting on the novelty of here are these new features, but like they don't ultimately have like a lot of strategic uh like a ton of strategic stuff in them. And like over time that's like they've really built up. I feel like now often I feel like a lot of RPGs that I've played recently have often like had somewhat the opposite problem where there's just like so many systems that like it's actually like a little hard to tell like what is like the thing that I should be focusing on, like what are the actual priorities. Like I can tell that like there's like 5 systems here like interleaving, but I don't quite understand like what my goals are. So like there's a struggle between, you know a lot of stuff that's influenced by stuff that's like relatively simple, or stuff that's like just like kind of gotten lost in the weeds of like complexity. And
Right.
um I don't know, like looking at like Final Fantasy 13, that was a game. It's okay, it's a little older now. I've completely fucked up by the passage of time here.
Yeah,
The
it
game's been like
happens.
it's over a decade. What the hell? But like in that era, I think a lot of people didn't quite understand what I was going for, just because like it was like
Mhm.
slightly too different, and like it just doesn't quite communicate like what are your goals in combat. But I don't know, like Tactics Ogre is actually a great comparison point, because like those games are like really about like having the most efficient turn possible.
Mhm.
I just think a lot about in the first one where like you can throw rocks
Yeah.
at like at anyone. So
Yeah.
like if a unit like hasn't like attacked on his turn because like you're out of range, the most efficient thing to do is throw a rock at an ally's head, so they'll take like 1 point of damage and you'll gain experience. It's like just like ruthlessly efficiency minded.
I've never even thought to do that, but now I'm probably gonna do it relentlessly.
Oh god, it's such a
That's beautiful.
I
Oh,
think they took that out of later ones because it's like it
oh.
definitely didn't make it into Final Fantasy Tactics,
No, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I went to go
but
back
like
to
it's
play.
like efficiency, right? Like you have to like be like perfectly efficient about this. You're like trying to like figure like what's another optimization I can pull out of here.
Right. Yeah. It's and again, I feel that optimization in getting the car, because it's like, okay, I wanted to make sure that my the 4 abilities per page are stacked in a way that I'm going to get the most actions out before I flip the page. And then my last page, I wanted to make sure that it had um some staying power, and like I could linger on that page a little longer in case the sword needed to finish its
Mm.
cooldown, which is a little longer. And I definitely ended up feeling that depth of strategy, but without the like slow plottingness of that I feel with Tactics Ogre. It's like, and I don't feel so bad. I hit a hard situation in getting the car, but like I didn't feel bad about losing so much as I do when I lose a tactics game, because it's like, holy shit, I just sunk an hour into this,
Oh
like,
yeah, they're so long.
right, and then I lose, and then I've got to reload, and it's like, oh, we're back here again, and that's really frustrating. But the speed really does help a lot, which is something I really enjoy.
That
What?
was definitely like like a big thing is like when you get a game over, like I want to be like, no, you can just get right back in. You can
Mhm.
either like get right back into the fight if you think you got it, or like just throw you out into onto the road like right before the fight so you can switch your load. And I'm like, all right, I know what load I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try this again.
Right, right.
But like it also does like lead to like an interesting like difficulty balancing situation where like in like a tactics game or like a turn-based RPG, um there's only like so much you can do to like have like a range of like um are you doing a perfect play, like is your difficulty coming from like how forgiving is it for not doing like perfect optimum damage, whereas in this, like, well, there's like a because there's like a button timing component to it, there's like a like trying to strategize while you're getting hit in the face. um the game sort of I have to like figure out like how optimally should I assume that a player is playing? Because
Right.
like when I'm testing these battles, I'm like, pressing buttons pretty decisively, but I'm not going to necessarily assume that a player coming in, with the context of maybe like they're trying a new like loadout, or like they're just still being introduced to the mechanics. They're probably not going to be playing as optimally as I was. I'm like, needed to, like in play testing, I had to do like a lot of rebalancing just to like, because like they're either like not performing as like efficiently as like I would have expected, or like actually I had to rebalance like very close to release to make it harder, because like players were actually just like total murderers. They're just
Right.
like really really snappy with the healing. I had to like nerf healing so much to because like they're just like so much better at it than I thought they'd be.
Right. It's also, it's one of those things where when you have an incredibly streamlined system, right, and you implement new information to the player, it like it can almost go like I noticed I built up a habit playing through the first act, and then when type balances or elemental balances came into play more in the second act, it was like I was just so like used to doing my thing that like I didn't even like compute, and that's a an interesting design challenge to like approach. So I mean, eventually I put two and three together and like understood where I was like falling down. But I'm curious, like, what you think the hardest part of like ramping up that difficult. Like you said you had to increase the difficulty, but like, what's the hardest part of increasing the difficulty without like breaking core things about the game when you have such a streamlined system?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've definitely touched on like it's very easy to not necessarily, especially in like an action like in a game that's like so fast paced. It's like the player needs to know like what did they do wrong, um, and like they like the player needs to know that they're failing, and it's like definitely hard to communicate that when you're in like such like a complicated space. And like
Hmm.
one of the things that I sort of hope like there's a difficulty ramp up in Act 2 when we introduce elemental types, but part of the reason why it ramps up in difficulty is because enemies can do like a lot of damage to you, like way more than like expected if they're exploiting an elemental weakness.
Right.
So like hopefully the fact that they're killing you fast like makes you realize like, oh, that's not I'm not doing that strategically correctly.
Mm-hmm. Definitely
Whereas
happened. Definitely
um
died fast.
yeah, a lot of the balance tweaks I ended up making were like making like enemy damage just like chunkier. Like they take like a little less like they take a little longer to attack, but when they do attack, they do more damage, just to like make it clear that like, no, you're getting hit too hard. You need to prepare for this, rather than just like something happening in the background that you're not really like quite parsing. But it is like I think this is just a like sign that all RPGs like have to confront, and like it can just be a problem where like because your verb set is just so high, especially if it's like all about like finding combinations, you know it can be
Right.
hard to tell like what exactly is the failure here
Right. Right.
in
Right.
my strategy.
The other thing is I notice my gaze like focuses on the button cooldowns, the health window. Like it's like, yeah, you've got a whole screen full of beautiful visuals, but my like eyes are like super locked in there because that's like it's just information, data, boom, 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 which I love. But like I mean, I'm curious if you find it frustrating at all, not being able to utilize more of the screen real estate to like provide prompts and cues and that kind of thing.
Yeah, like that was definitely something I was surprised by. I didn't even realize that would be a concern. I mean, like over time, the battles got more and more fast paced. It's like I streamlined elements. Uh, really early on, when you press the button, it didn't like just like instantly do the attack. It like pulled up a menu of like who do you want to attack, and sort of like there was like a like you could like rapidly like double tap it to like get through it, but it was like much more slower. And I was like, wait, I'm like getting feedback that like this is like just too much like mental overhead for people to think about. So that's why we switched to this thing where there's just like one selected target and there's like a button for changing targets, and then like everything is just like one press, one press, one press.
Right, right,
So
right.
like stuff like that like made battles like move a lot faster. The combo system where it's like it encourages you to do another attack within like before the animation for the previous attacker like finishes, like that like really encourages you to get into a rhythm of it. But like you do definitely have to like watch the timers to like know what that rhythm is. And I don't know, this was just like all new to me. Like I've never done like any sort of like game that's like this fast paced. I'm used to visual novels where you have all the time in the world to look at the entire screen.
Right, right, right. Well,
So that was definitely like just surprising to me. And it's like, oh, okay, so if something important is happening, it needs to like really draw a lot of attention to itself.
right.
Um, Enemy abilities used to be they just like they would just have like an animation for them,
Oh, right.
but like it would just like show like the little nurse squid like would just like do like the squiggly thing and then like do the heal, and it would have like a little bit of a banner at the bottom of the screen to tell you what the ability name was, and it was like it just doesn't like process. There's just too much going on, so that's
Hmm.
why we have the big flash on screen. Like everything comes to a stop for like 1.5 seconds to let you know here's an enemy doing an ability. I'm showing you only the enemy that's relevant. I'm telling you the name. Okay, now you can get back to your combo.
Right, right, right.
Because
Yeah,
like that
I
was just
didn't
something
even
that came
notice
in
that.
as
Like,
like,
I never understood. I subconsciously, I guess, understood the value of knowing that the enemy was doing stuff, but I never really thought about the design reason why it's a whole screen takeover. But it makes so much sense now that you mention it.
but
Um,
it is like definitely like slightly like, I don't know, it's slightly a bummer that like we have like really great animations and like you only pay so much attention to them. Hopefully, like as you get like a little more like used to fights and like
mhm.
you'll probably have like more of an idea of what you've got like going on in your head, and like once you get into more of a rhythm of it, you'll probably be looking at things a little more. But like it's just fundamentally there's just so much information we need to give you, and there's only so much you can do if it's a fast-paced game.
Right,
you know
right.
Hopefully you get the idea, and like during those brief moments of like calmness you can like go, oh, cool animation.
Yeah, yeah.
I
The
hope, because man, they're cool, and also so much went into them.
You mentioned visual novels, so we will get into that in a little bit. But one of the things, the thought experiments I've been running while I've been playing the game is, get in the car is incredibly streamlined. Do you think it's possible to streamline it even more? Is there an even further reduced version of the JRPG combat system that could exist? And how far could we go before it like becomes unenjoyable?
I don't I, I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably so like looking at Final Fantasy 13, our big inspiration, the way that like battles work in that is like most of your interactions and fights are just like switching classes. Like it's just like picking like, am I gonna have like 3 sentinels as tanks? Am I gonna have like a Ravager, a Commando, and a healer? You have a button that pulls up a menu to just like switch between your loadouts of classes. But like the actual attacks you do, it's like 2 AI characters, and for like the person you're controlling, you just hit auto battle anyway. Like it's just like the top is just like auto, and it just like fills up an ATB. So like a complaint that people had when playing this game is like, oh, it plays itself without like realizing like no, like the strategic thing is like you're switching like which classes you switch through, because like as a result like you can like switch really rapidly between like a high DPS loadout, or like a really tanky loadout, or like build up the ravage meter and then like switch to like all exploit damage.
Right.
But it was all like the actual like which actions you picked were all just like auto based on what your class was. And the fact that like that was a common reaction to that game made me think like, oh, well, maybe I should in this one make it like a little more like explicit about like you press a button and you watch things happen instantly instead of like queuing up like a bunch of auto attacks that like are just like whatever the game thinks is the most efficient thing. But
Right.
like you could push it back more in the Final Fantasy 13 direction.
Right, where it's
It's
just
just
is yeah, auto driven. Um, it's
and it just like has like it just has a really different feel to it. Like even if like a lot of like the way that like the actual mechanics are pretty similar, it doesn't actually like make like that much of a difference if like the game has auto chosen same actions that you would have picked them and pressed the buttons for anyway.
right,
But like it just feels different.
right. You get more play out of it. It's super. It's I mean, for those of you who are too young to remember, Final Fantasy 13 when it came out, I mean, it got a lot of heat, negative reception from the gamer populace. It is really interesting to hear that you like really relied on it as an inspiration. Usually people pick well adored games as their but I mean did the game hold a special place for you, or like what was the
So I didn't like play it like when it came out. I played they made two sequels to it. One is like a kind of weird like time travel like going through a bunch of old Final Fantasy 13 assets. It's clearly very low budget. And then they made a second sequel where you just play as Lightning, and it's inspired by Majora's Mask. And because Majora's Mask is one of my favorite games, when this game came out, they like talked in their press tours like it was inspired by Majora's Mask. I'm like, I want to check this out. I've never played a Final Fantasy 13 game before, but like I'm gonna look at this one, and I loved it so much I decided to go back. And um, part of it is because like over these sequels they had refined it and like sort of like made like an action RPG based around a lot of these ideas. It was really interesting to go back and see like here's two other versions of this battle system that like feel slightly different, and you're just like gonna see like all the iteration. So I didn't play Final Fantasy 13 until like I don't know, like 2015, I want to say,
right
like not contemporary at all, but um playing it like it just like instantly clicked because like I'd played the more better tutorialized versions of it, and like I was like, oh, I know this, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do here. This is really fun.
right
And I really liked it, and I just wanted to, like make something that had that feeling. I'm like, I one of my biggest goals with Get in the Car Loser is that I want to convince everyone that Final Fantasy 13 actually has a great battle system, and I want to do it by showing you here's the things that you should be thinking about it while you're playing. Here's like a slightly alternate version of it, with like a different game feel and like differently arranged things, but ultimately the same underlying ideas. Because those ideas are great, and I think like if you understand them, it's like, oh no, this actually feels this is fun.
right it engages the player in a way that like you're actually playing with the systems of the machine rather than like Paper Mario style where it's like, okay, let's tack a mini game on top of the action every single time, and it doesn't have that same like liveliness with the I mean it's the numbers behind the machine, but like I don't know, I do quite enjoy it. And it's cool to hear somebody I played 13 at launch and it's not my kind of game at that time. In that phase of my life was one, not that into JRPGs, and two, wasn't really like didn't really click for me. But I mean, like hearing about games that I don't necessarily like in a different perspective is like awesome, because then I start to understand the designs a little bit better. And I definitely, if the goal was to make people understand why these systems are good with Get in the Car, I think it's been accomplished, because I kind of get it now, where I definitely didn't before. So one thing again, like I've mentioned many times, attention span is a really hard thing for me. And I'm curious if you've seen is this at all a reaction to people's attention span? Because you've been making visual novels for a long time, which are very attention oriented. I mean, they're slower paced, but they require reading and a little an investment, which is I'm noticing harder and harder to get out of people. Um, so I'm curious how you feel about like the current state of attention spans compared to when you were releasing more visual novels.
I mean, I definitely feel that. There's definitely some times where like I just like don't quite have the energy to play something like really, really engaged or like really like reading heavy or like it just varies, especially like over the course of the past 2 years, it's been like really dependent on like am I in the mindset for something like that, like I want like something like really like brainless, or do I want something that's like or do I want something that's even more slow and heavy? Um Ultimately, I think the sorts of games that like despite like obviously like I also like sometimes struggle with this, and but I do still love like really long RPGs, and um ultimately like I think my wheelhouse is not going to be like super short, super mechanical stuff that's like, like just like small clever puzzles or whatever. Like I
Mm-hmm.
I can only get like so actiony, cuz like I do really want to, deal with like these big themes and like these big character arcs and like all this big character drama, and that necessitates, something that's like slightly longer and slightly like has like progression over the course of 10 to 15 hours. So I didn't try not to worry about that too much. I figure, like other developers will make stuff that like fits those niches, and like even if this is not a game that like at every moment of the pandemic I would have had the attention span to play, like I think there's like still room for that.
Right. The
And as far as like I don't know, as far as visual novels go, like I think it's just like a different sort of long-term attention span, because like it's not like it's not any shorter, and
mhm.
um I think one thing is that like the way that you go between like story and battle segments like really mixes things up, so it's like it just doesn't feel like all that homogenous, whereas like obviously visual novel is just like all reading, and like even in like my games where like I've tried to mix it up with like puzzles in between, or like some sort of like strategizing or like scheduling mechanics, it's still ultimately like you're sitting down to read for however many hours, whereas this is like you know get some banter, get into a fight, get some banter, press some buttons, and like hopefully like the interplay between the two like leaves you wanting more, rather than like feeling like it's all this like very flat or even.
Right, right. Get in the car does a very good job of like just putting a thumb on different parts of the brain, like in various frequency, where it's like, okay, I've got the equipment loadout time. Okay, I'm going to do some comprehension and like analysis, and then when I go into the combat, it's more like that hunter gatherer, like can I push the button fast enough and keep my initial plan in lock. And then there's the narrative side, which is the listening and or I guess reading, and memory and those kind of things. Whereas with a traditional visual novel, it's like all reading comprehension and like memory constantly. Like it doesn't
Mhm.
vary it up. That's a really interesting thing to think about now. Is that something that you think is kind of like an essential evolution in design philosophy?
I don't know if it's essential, but it's definitely a space that I'm more like that I'm interested in exploring. I think it's just, like it's just interesting, like how can I leave the player like wanting more? How can I make them look forward to these things? Um, like how do I make them like not to take for granted that like, you're gonna get this like interesting story bit.
Right.
Um, I think just it's not necessary. Like I don't know. There's also like literary techniques that can have this effect too. But
Right.
I do think it's like interesting to like try to do it mechanically.
Right. I mean, obviously you've learned a lot, um, systematic making this game systematically. Like it's a pretty big departure. I definitely still see the visual novel strength in there. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of character interaction with each other, um but it's in a refreshing way. But I'm curious, what what you found the easiest stepping out of the visual novel, a little further out of the visual novel box, even if we've got one foot still in there, but applying the rest of these systems into your game, what did you find the easiest to bring in and complexify things with?
Uh, I mean, honestly, most of it was like fairly difficult. There's just like an RPG is just composed out of so many different elements. Like I was just like over like even if something was like relatively straightforward, like um the items in the game all have like item stories to them or road stories to them where like when you use them in battle, it unlocks like this little bit of backstory or like a story about that's somehow tied into this item. And like part of this is like this is just the mechanic that I like in games. It's I really liked it in Transistor. I liked it in like Nier and Drakengard. It encourages you to like use different things that you wouldn't otherwise. It's a very simple mechanic, but like it requires a whole new presentation layer.
Right.
It means that you can't like because we have these three stories. It means that like I can't like change the rewards later because like I've made a structural decision for like there has to be three things. So like if I wanted to change like when do these stories unlock, like maybe if it would be like, use this in like more battles or like use like every different ability or like, like some other mechanic, like you just like you can't do it. You already made the decision. And like because like there's I think there's around 70 items in the game, it's like it's still a lot of content.
Right.
And like like over the course of the game, it's like writing all that content was like, like on the one hand, it's straightforward. I know how to write stories, but it's like it's a lot, and I'm sort of beholden to the decision that I made early on about like what does the structure mean, and like I have to work within it. So like even like stuff that I thought would be like really simple, uh, even that ended up having like consequences in terms of like iterative design.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's always the case when you make that one decision early in the process, and now you've got, yeah, I've made that. I won't call it a mistake because that's game dev, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but it's got to be that way. You've created a system, you've got to follow through with it. It can be really tough. Did you at least find the I mean, I guess 4 games deep now more. Did you find the writing process easier than your previous games?
Yes, but only because by and large like the structure of Get in the Car, like it doesn't every other game that like I've done narratively has always had like something weird in the presentation. Um in Analog, it's all like one-sided conversations where you can
Mm-hmm.
only communicate through like these yes or no prompts. So like I had to like contort all the dialogue to either fit into like one of those or like one of these diary entries, and like every bit of story has to be contorted to fit into that. In Ladykiller, we have this dialogue system where like you can just like interject at any like on any line of dialogue as like ideas come to the protagonist's head and like they disappear on screen as like they're no longer relevant to the conversation. This was hell to write for. This took like months and months of like just like doing like narrative tests and like like writing scenes and like realizing like how do you write for this system when a line can come in like within like a 7 like line window, and like
Right.
how do you like make that like feel satisfying. That was like that was a huge challenge. Whereas Get in the Car is just normal dialogue. It's just like they just shoot the shit. None of like the dialogue choices, like the dialogue choices affect what jokes you get to see, but they don't like have like huge like cascading consequences. It's all just
Mm-hmm.
like very straightforward. Um, I just got to write like like a bunch of fun character writing. That was so it was a lot easier, partially because of experience, but mostly because like I knew like everything else in this is going to be a big mechanical experiment. This is the one thing I'm just going to do completely conventionally. I'm not going to push the envelope with this at all. It will simply coast by on the quality of this is good writing and that's enough. And
Mm-hmm.
that made it a lot easier.
Right. I think also having a depth of experience, it's easier to get to a point where you trust yourself to be able to do that, which I think you've definitely earned at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, also, like, experience just, like, tells you, like, what are the constraints, you know? Like, now I know what is something that's easy to write for. I can now just, like, do that.
Um, but given the we'll say simplified nature of the dialogue presentation and the storytelling, can you tell us a little bit more about the story that you wanted to tell with it? Um, we meet these characters, we learn a lot about them, and then they're on the road trip, and it's a lot of the casual banter and like really feeling friendly. Um, but for the audience, I guess, can you tell a little bit more about the grander machinations of the world and the story that you're trying to present?
Yeah, sure. So, like the grander story is that there's like this 1,000-year cycle that like is supposed to play out in a certain way, but for some reason this time around, things aren't like following like the what fate said is supposed to happen when the machine devil and cultists start appearing and like um causing destruction in this kingdom. So, the protagonist, her friend Grace, decides she's going to take fate into her own hands. So she steals the sword that was used in Legend to fight the Machine Devil, and ropes two of her friends into going on to this road trip to, go fight evil, take the fight to the Machine Devil instead of waiting around for whatever the angels think is going to happen. And as a road trip, it's largely this is um, an excuse, like a journey of self discovery. I think is like really like like that's the classic road
Mm-hmm.
trip story. Is you start out with the group of young people who like sort of have an idea of what is going on, and like over the course of being stuck in this pressure cooker for like 2 days straight, they learn more about themselves, and they learn like um you know they go over this yeah, no, like self discovery is really what it is, and it's also just like a lot of like uh a lot of conversations about nothing in there, because like when you're on a road trip, when you're stuck in the backseat for hours, you just like run out of things to talk about. You just sort of talk about bullshit, and like I feel like that's like where like the real self discovery like gets in there.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of the protagonist Sam is like this very nervous, like very unself confident, always self deprecating healer who is like really like unsure about her role in all this nonsense, but like she just got roped in because a pretty girl told her to get in the car, and she was helpless to do anything but. And like over the course of this, she realizes like no, she was actually like roped into this for a reason. She's actually like extremely supportive as a friend, and like she learns like I won't get too into like what happens in like the later acts, but um a lot of this is simply about like all these people like realizing like no, they actually like are more impressive than they think, and they have like a better dynamic than they think, but also like getting into sort of these questions of like what does it mean to like stand up and like fight evil,
Mm-hmm.
because like like it's a very heroic narrative, but I didn't want to like take it for granted that like oh well, heroism is obviously going on a quest for the king. Like I didn't want
Right,
this to be
right.
like so sort of straightforward. I wanted to be like this is like they're all like rowdy and like justice focused, but it's all about like you picking what fights are the important ones.
Right. It's yeah, the characters uh they they are heroic. Like Grace has got the, I guess, the most uh aggressive go get 'em attitude, but there's like a lack of like traditional stoic heroism in the story. It does feel just like a group of friends that would otherwise have been hanging out at the mall going on this adventure, right?
I mean, stoic heroism's cool, but I really like rowdy heroism. I really like people are like just like screaming about justice, like
Right.
like really like fiery.
Um, the the fun thing is like with the road trip narrative, you get a lot of time to like meet these characters, being an LGBTQ plus oriented game, you learn about their sexualities and their interests, and a lot of that plays into the dialogue and your dialogue options. I'm curious, like, for those who would just see that and not understand its role in the narrative, can you touch on like what does it mean to have like a car full of lesbians going on the road trip together, and what its narrative purpose in the story is?
I mean, ultimately, like a big part of it is simply like it's fun. Like this is like a bunch of people like flirting, just like making jokes, like making the sorts of dumb jokes that lesbians make in the back seats of road trips, having gone on a couple. It's just like that's just like that sort of like sense of humor, that sort of like those sorts of vibes. Ultimately, like it's not necessarily I don't know. I don't think there's like necessarily a grand social message to this game being really gay. It's just that like as as a giant queer, like I want to make games with people who like are like my friends and like are like me, and like this is like what I this is just realism. This is just like these are just ultimately I just want these to be like fun people to hang out with who like feel like the sorts of anxieties and like worries and like personal growth that they're going through is like something relatable and real. And I don't think necessarily it really matters about like particular demographics so much as like is there that core of sincerity there? Is this like something that like actually like feels like, do these character dynamics feel real?
One of the very interesting things that I noticed about the way that the characters are written and the way they speak, is that there's anxieties in there for sure, but generally it's a very upbeat and happy tone, which honestly contrasts vastly a lot of the LGBT content that was produced 5 to 10 years ago, including my own work. It's a big difference compared to the stuff that where I was playing in 2012, 2013, 2014. So I'm curious about the intentionality of this tone. Did it come about naturally? And do you see this happening across the grander category of queer games?
So I mean, I will say, like over the course of the story, like we start off with like a very fluffy tone, and like as we get into it, like there's more heaviness that sort of comes in. There's more, um, there's bigger challenges that come across on the road, like dealing with some definitely some heavier themes and like some um just heavier emotional moments. But like by and large, I wanted the tone of this game to like be heroic, and like if there's a lot of adversaries, part of that is just because like it's necessary to throw adversary and doubt at heroes in order to make them like seem like they're heroic. So I don't want this to feel like the goal is not like to be like didactic or like showing like, oh, this is how you should feel about queer issues. It's
Right.
just this is what it means for when someone's self-doubt uh is about these things, and like is about their own self-expression. Well, for their own self-expression to prevail, you have to show that doubt first. But like it's not like it's like it's not like a very special message. It's not, and I don't necessarily want to get into like tragedy porn either. Just
Right.
like this idea that like like you just want to see suffering because like that's what's realistic.
Right. Which was
I feel
absolutely a theme like 5 to 10 years ago in a lot of games. It was absolutely there. The hardship was absolutely present. Um,
definitely. But like I also do like kind of worry about like like pushing back on that too hard and going into just like these completely fluffy like like
right.
unchallenging depictions of like like people who never like go through anything. I don't want to like see like you know people suffering for the sake of it. I'm hoping like you have like a greater thematic purpose, but like ultimately like people, you know, like having perfect cartoony lives is like there's not necessarily a lot of emotional realness to that. So like there has to be like a middle ground in between there where you are, you know, getting into something real. You're getting into something that like people can actually see themselves in, that isn't like so simple that like, you know, you just like can't relate to it at all. While, you know, all this like having like a thematic point other than like feeling bad for the sake of realism, which is like also not satisfying.
Right. It's like, yeah, there was a phase where it really felt like the tragedy meant real and there was no balance, and I think we're getting closer to a real balance of full framed expression, which is a amazing thing, and I'm it's one of the nicest things I've seen coming out of the industry in a long time. um the so as we're getting close to the end here, I do believe sometime next year is going to be your 10th anniversary since Analog was released.
Good lord, yeah, no, that's true. I've
uh no, you've been staunchly indie like the whole time, and you've been a local legend in our city for the whole time. um I'm curious how you personally feel about this impending milestone of a decade in games.
I honestly haven't really been thinking about it that much, but now, man, 10 years?
You're right.
That's ridiculous. It's I don't know. Part of it is like because like dev cycles are just so long. Like I've made 4 games over the span of that 10 years, and
Right.
like really lopsidedly too. Like my last 2 games like took like 4 years apiece. That's like it's just it doesn't feel like it's so long because you're just like even just like one game is like
Yeah.
long enough to have its own like gravity to it. Like it feels like this is just like an era on its own.
Right.
And I don't I don't know. I mean, I've definitely like learned a lot over the span of 10 years, and like I you know, like making an RPG, like moving on from visual novels, not because I don't love the genre, but just because like I don't want to do like the same thing that I'm gotten comfortable with, is that to me feels like bigger than the alternate universe where like I spent 10 years doing the same thing and getting like really, really good at it, but like just like exploring the same space over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm trying to look at it as like what's my future going from here? What is, you know, what are the sorts of things that I want to move into now? And like, you know, making an RPG was like my first big like new step after, you know, 6 years of like having done like visual novels. And I don't I don't want to look back too much. Like I think it's just like a lot more interesting. It's like there's so much more stuff that I want to do, and hopefully I'll like learn how to do it.
Right. Now, as we both know, indie dev is not easy. We have seen a lot of great devs come and go and fall out of the scene, and new ones coming in. And I'm curious to your personal secrets to perseverance.
Uh, I mean, I don't know. It's possible. Like the studio just went under like 2 years ago, and I just didn't notice. That's a thing. The thing about like having a 4-year dev cycle is that like every time like you do a release, like everything is completely changed. Like I don't like know what my Steam metrics are like compared to like where they were at Ladykiller's launch, because like that was like 4 years in the
Mm-hmm.
in indie games right now is like a lifetime. That's like a completely different place. I don't it's hard to know like what's a success look like right now. What does hanging in look like? Is this like I feel like often like I've felt like I've been barely hanging on, but the fact that I've been barely hanging on for 10 years is probably indicative of something. But like it's just like so hard to tell. It's possible that like I'm simply too stubborn to realize that like I should have packed it in. It's like it just everything keeps changing, and maybe maybe the market in 2 years from now will finally turn to something so terrifying that like the ship capsizes, or maybe maybe it's fine. It's I can't tell. This is something that terrifies me, frankly.
Right.
I joke about having confidence because like what else can you do?
Right. I kind of feel you on this. It's been a I mean, yeah. I mean, we're still here. It's just a question of never knowing how much longer. But that's fine. I kind of come to peace with it. Yeah. Usually when I have story devs, I want to ask about like what's changed since you started, but I think I'm getting very bored of that question lately. So I'm curious what you think is the changes to come, both maybe for Toronto as a game scene and indie at large.
I don't know, like especially like Toronto locally, we're definitely like we're clearly in a period where like things are gonna change. Like
Yeah.
it feels like a lot of things that used to be stable have sort of like fallen into flux, and like community spaces are sort of like especially because of the pandemic, it's just like where is the local scene going to go from here? And I hope it's somewhere that's like less centralized. Like I hope it continues to be less centralized, and I hope we I mean in general I hope the future is less centralized, frankly, because like this is never good. But I mean especially like in terms of like I don't know, like the past 2 years of like events being kind of in this very weird like liminal space of like online only, no one's really sure, everyone's kind of exhausted. I definitely hope that I don't know. I hope there are more events that like we just sort of see each other and like have like short conversations at, and like do the nod that we used to do.
Right. Right. So hey.
I just I'm really hopeful because like we've seen this happen in the local scene here so many times. Like the center of gravity in Toronto indie games has like shifted like a ton over the years, and like people are like clearly like very adapted to this, and I really hope that continues to be the case.
Right. Well, I think as long as folks like you keep sticking it out in the indie game scene, Toronto will always have a lively and thriving indie games space. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna quickly dig up the Steam link for Get in the Car so folks can get it. But is there anything you wanted to tell the beautiful people in the chat before we dip out of here?
So Get in the Car Loser is the main game is available for free. It's on Steam. It's on itch. You can just like download and start playing that right now. But like if you want me to be able to eat, I highly recommend picking up the DLC, which is an extra story chapter. It's sort of like a beach episode. It's got like a full like whole new story chapter. It's got like a bunch of cool items. It's got swimsuits. It's funny. It's like some of the best writing in the game. I put in the paid part, so please go play the DLC Battle on the Big Boardwalk. If you like the base game, Get in the Car Loser, which is for free. Right. But trust me, it's good.
And anything else you would like people to check out or follow you on platforms?
I am the only platform you can follow me on is Twitter at Christine Love. It's a I don't know, terrible website. Hate it there. Bad posts. That's where I am.
Everyone's favorite dumpster. Good old Twitter. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It has been an absolute blast to finally get a chance to sit down and chit chat for so long. Guys, check out the game. It converted me into a streamlined RPG fan. And again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was great talking.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Goodbye, chat. We'll see you when I see you. Bye.